Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk9741. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go.
Good morning and welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we're back with Punk7741. He's got two Attys, horn-rimmed glasses, and a mole. In real life, he's got a background in marketing at Microsoft, and now he's the founder of an NFT collection called ittybits. Please welcome Jeremy.eth to the show. Jeremy, how are you, man?
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Mate, excited to have you on. I've been seeing these ittybits pop up on my feed, and it sounds like you've got a diehard community too, so I'd love to sort of unwrap that with you. But maybe before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, normally I sort of ask, how you got your handle. Is there a story behind it? But I'm assuming your name is actually Jeremy. But Jeremy.eth, that would have been a really hard handle to find. Like, you must have been in early.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into crypto in 2017, just on the recommendations of a few colleagues at work. I had discounted it all as kind of just internet gaming, gaming tokens or whatnot in the mid 2000s. But finally in 17, I took the plunge, went through the proverbial rabbit hole, if you will, and was hooked, right? Was hooked on this kind of concept of decentralization and whatnot. And it was through that same kind of connection at work that I was told to take a look at ENS domains. And that was before you could get short names. Like, you could only register 7 digits or 7 characters and up. And so I had versions of my name and first name and last name combined and stuff like that, but nothing short. But by being connected in that space at the time, I realized I was, following the ENS blogs and stuff. And I saw the dates coming forward for short name registrations under 6 characters, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 character domains. And so I was in that space, like in those early days when those first came available. So I actually was able to get my name, my 3 daughters' first names, my wife's first name, kind of a bunch of first names that are quite, helpful now to own, things like Sophia, Chloe, Julia, Greg, Todd, quite a few kind of really nice first names to hold on to.
What a bargain. I'm assuming they'd be worth a bucket load right now. When was that? When did you really get into ENSs? Or
I think it was, I think my first ENS was probably 18. And then if I'm not mistaken, I have to go back and look at kind of transaction history on when I actually secured the 6 characters and the 5 character ones. But I think it was 19 when they opened up the 6 character, 5 character, 4 character.
Super early. Well, mate, great to sort of have you on PunkCast. And I think a few people sort of reached out just, wanting to hear this interview as well. I think sort of interested to hear about it a bit. But, would you be able to share a little bit about your sort of background, sort of pre-crypto, and then we can sort of get into your crypto part?
Yeah. So, I've been in and around the tech space for a while, right? So coming out of grad school, I did a small stint at the Houston Rockets, which was, the NBA basketball team down in Houston. And then I left that to go into tech consulting in the DC area, which quickly moved me out to Seattle to work at Microsoft as a consultant. And after a couple of years of doing that, I transitioned over to full-time at Microsoft. And I was there for a little over 12 years. My last role, I was director of marketing operations, marketing services, not a developer, don't write code, not an engineer. I was always kind of on the business and operations side. And I did that for the last 12 years, leading up into through COVID, really. I left about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to join a video game company where I'm currently at. And at the same time, over the last few years, I've been kind of really just exploring the Web3 space, learning how to do stuff in Web3, really leveraging AI to its fullest extent to kind of empower me to do stuff on my own in Web3 as well. So yeah, I've been kind of goofing around in Web3 and kind of being a quasi creator and whatnot since roughly 2021. Ever since I first started getting into, I had ENS in like 1920 or so, but I didn't realize those were really NFTs. I didn't think of them as that. I didn't really get into, I would say, NFTs until roughly around 2020.
What did you actually study?
I have a master's degree in international business.
Okay. And then you straight into the Houston Rockets, man. That's pretty cool.
That was fun. That was cool for a year. I wasn't a big NBA or basketball fan, so it was kind of an interesting transition. Like I went there more for kind of the analytics challenge. I was research and insights manager, and it was kind of just a cool place to kind of, first roll out of grad school. It was kind of just a cool place to kind of, learn a little, apply kind of the MBA type kind of thinking processes to research and to, internal fan analytics and whatnot. But yeah, that I only did it for a year because I think, deep down, I think I wanted out of Texas, and looking back, kind of the lure of big tech and consulting at Microsoft kind of was pretty significant at the time.
When was that? What year was? It was like,
I think I left the Rockets in 2007 and moved to DC. And then I was only in DC for like 3 months because my first client was Microsoft. And so they wanted me on site in Seattle. So I pretty much moved out to Seattle, by winter of the same year.
Gotcha. And that was when you sort of started, I guess, getting into a bit more the tech side. And then you got into crypto when in 17? What was your journey into crypto?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I remember, this is funny. Like I remember sitting, I can remember the building and the cubicle that I was at Microsoft in like 2010, 2011 or so when I read my first article on Bitcoin, and I didn't understand it. I didn't quite get it. So I discounted it then. And then I discounted it a couple of more times when it came across my channels. So it wasn't until 2017 when a friend of mine from Lebanon was in town at Microsoft and was convincing me over lunch probably, to dig in deeper and learn more about Bitcoin and learn more about Ethereum. And I think he had made some decent gains in the last 6 months, and he was kind of trying to get me to see what he was doing. And then it was just this massive kind of deep dive for the next, I'd say 6 months. It was like fire hose, like everything was crypto.
Crazy. And that was just Bitcoin mostly, or were you sort of dabbling into
just Bitcoin and Ethereum? It was Bitcoin and Ethereum, I'd say 80%, and then 20% I goofed around with like a really long tail of like Neo, a bunch of like ERC20 tokens. It was always like a 10, 15% of the portfolio, and most of it is, went to zero. So yeah, but it was primarily Bitcoin, primarily Ethereum, probably, 50, 40, 10, I would say, Bitcoin, Ethereum, shitcoins.
Gotcha. And then I think that's when I got into basically I lost everything in 2017. I do remember Neo. That was touted to be the Chinese Ethereum at the time.
I think it was Ant shares at first, and then it converted into Neo. I had Neo. I had like OMG, I think it was called. I had what do I have? ARK, ARK.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of Ripple. I sold all of that at break even. Like I had it at 24 cents. It ran all the way up to like, I want to say it was like $4 at one point. And then it ran all the way back down to like less than 24 cents. I think I sold all break even. I did have a couple of moments. My wife likes to remind me of this. Like there were a couple of moments when, so I bought into like Bitcoin and Ethereum before they ran up to 20K. or before Bitcoin ran up to 20K. And then it ran all the way back down. If you remember in early 18, it ran all the way back down to like 4K or 3K or something like that. And I held it all the way up to 20. And then I held it all the way back down to 3 or 4 or whatever it went down to. And there was one night where I lost all conviction and I sold everything. Like I sold everything at like, roughly break even, maybe a small loss. I don't remember, but it was devastating. And I went to bed that night and I couldn't sleep. I felt like shit. And the next morning I woke up and bought it all back again. And so grateful that I don't know, like I got scared. I sold it all. I think I bought it back the next morning for slightly more, but it wasn't terrible. And then from then on, it was just like, just hold it. This is going to be a long journey. Like the quick wins are maybe not going to happen anymore. And just bear with it and wait it out.
Well, I'm sure it's finally sort of paid off for you, given that, Bitcoin's sort of circa 40 grand again. But I think there was a lot of big lessons sort of coming out of that, because I think in that first one, it felt like just a bit of a gamble for me. And so I probably wasn't like super sort of invested. So I sort of feel like the last cycle was probably my first cycle. So it sounds like you've been through multi-cycles now. This is probably your third, probably my second cycle. I mean, how are you sort of feeling about where we are right now?
I mean, it's weird because I don't, so 2018 was an obsessive year of always looking at TradingView, always looking at charts. And it was unhealthy, right? Like I'd gone through like the 17 cycle of like going all the way up and then coming all the way down and then thinking it would go back up quickly. And 18 was it was a super slow year. It was it was the beginning of a long winter. And I think towards the end of 18, I just realized like I had to uninstall all those apps. I had to quit looking at numbers. And so in the more recent run up, what was it, 21 or so, when it ran back up to like 60K or something like that, like I didn't really have the apps installed anymore. Like I wasn't really, I was aware, like I didn't live under a rock. Like I knew the numbers were up again, but I also kind of told myself, don't get sucked into it. You're not selling anything right now anyway, so don't count any of this stuff. And so I kind of just, like I know it's at, I actually haven't checked in the last probably week. So I know it's at roughly 40 right now. I think it was up like to 48 or 49 or something like that a month ago. But like, I don't keep a close pulse on it anymore because like deep down, it's like, I think I'm just holding it anyway for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So it doesn't really come into anything.
Yeah. That's probably a smarter way to sort of play that. I probably need to.
I've been having to do it for vanity purposes because like I just wasted so many hours and so many like just wasted churned kind of time in 2018 that I just realized that's the way you got to manage it.
Well, especially if you have conviction on it, right? It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I think my wife sort of tells me that my emotions are probably heavily correlated to the markets. So I probably need to find a way to do the same.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool that you got in and had a lot of conviction in the space. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your entry into NFTs? Like, what was your first NFT?
I'd have to look at my wallet. I think like I had seen. Technically, I guess my ENS domain, some of my ENS domains are my first NFTs, but the first art NFT I believe that I bought was was one of the Beeple drops back in December of 2020, I think it was. So I have, I think I see you're Into the Ether there. Is it Into the Ether?
It is, yeah.
So I bought Into the Ether. I bought Bull Run. But I did not buy them during the drop. This was interesting. Like I had no idea what the price was going to be. I was following Beeple at the time. I knew the drop was coming up. It was during my youngest daughter's synchronized swimming, practice. And so I was driving her to practice. I wanted to get there early so that I could get her out of the car and like be sitting in the parking lot when the drop was live, because the drop was only open for like 5 minutes, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
The drop page launched and it was like $969, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Like, I mean, I didn't own any NFTs yet. I didn't know the market at all. And I quickly just shut the window and I was like, okay, well, that was a waste of time. Like, I'm not gonna spend $1,000 on an NFT. Closed the window, you know, went on to do other things while I was waiting for her practice to end. Maybe 20 minutes later, I opened up Nifty Gateway to check on like how the secondary market was faring. And like, they were already selling at like 3, 4, 5 grand. And I was like, oh crap, like this is something. And so I started monitoring the prices all evening that evening. The next day, prices dipped back down to roughly like 1,600. And I bought both into the Ether and bull run at that point, thinking like, all right, these are cool. Like maybe this is bottom. And then like literally an hour later, it just started going back up. And like, I don't think it ever reached those prices again, which was kind of like, it's the only time in NFTs I've ever actually like correctly called the bottom. And so I was able to get those two. And so that, and then of course, you know, the whole like spirit of Web3 and NFTs was focused on the next month or two leading up to his, 5,000 Everydays launch. And so that got me hooked. Like I was thinking more and more about, you know, okay, what's going on in NFTs? What else is prominent out there? I've heard of these punks before, but I don't know much about them. So maybe I should actually start researching them. So early 2021 is when I started researching punks, pretty deeply, right? Like I made the decision in early 2021 that I wanted to find one for myself. And they were still like, I want to say like 2 or 3 ETH at the time. They were still very affordable in early 2021. I had even done a couple of presentations, like social presentations at Microsoft. We had these things called brown bags where anyone could bring a topic that they wanted to present. You bring it to a conference room and other people show up during lunch and they just sit in and listen to other people talk about projects they're interested in, or like, you know, cultural things, whatever, anything, not even tech or Web3 related, just anything. And so I built out like a 20-page deck on what is Web3 and what is digital ownership and what are NFTs. And I was presenting to people it was like January, February of 2021, telling them, hey, you should probably buy a CryptoPunk. Why not? Like, it's digital ownership. It's this new thing. And like people would like laugh me out of the room, right? Like they didn't understand it. I was telling them at the time, like, I think the floor price was like, you know, less than 5 grand. So I was like explaining to them that you could get one for less than 5 grand. And they thought that was insane for an image. It's probably one of the best like alpha calls I ever made to other people that fell on deaf ears. But yeah, so I was doing a ton of research early in 2021, wanting to acquire one.
Jeremy, can I just ask why?
I just felt like, you know, that my experience coming into Web3 and seeing NFTs the way I saw them, and every time I kind of wanted to kind of do more research, I was always pointed back to CryptoPunks. And I know there were other projects. I know there were CryptoKitties. I know there were other things that, you know, preceded punks in some ways. But like the punks are what I was always led back to by articles I was reading, by people I was talking to at the time. Like no matter what, it always kind of led back to punks. And the more I looked at them and stared at them and zoomed in and out of the deep zoom capability on the homepage, like there was an aesthetic about them that I just started connecting with, that I, you know, once I had it in my mind that I needed one, like I just needed one at that point. And so I just kept looking, and I spent, you know, the first half of 2021 just looking at them and staring at them and just, you know, coveting them until I think it was May when I finally saw 7741 hit the floor, and it's bald like me. It's got glasses like me. It's got a mole. I had like a blemish on the same cheek. It was like, okay, I wish it had a shadow beard because I always have a shadow beard, but all in all, like it was like, whoa, that's actually a pretty bang on match. And it's on the floor. It kind of made sense.
Yeah. He's a really cool looking punk. So it's a 7741 is bold, hologram glasses and mole, and probably a spinning image of you. were you looking at any other traits at that time? Was it an easy sort of process for you, or was it sort of a long, sort of prolonged process?
No, it was pretty quick. Like as soon as I saw that hit the floor, it was like, all right, I should probably tell my wife that I'm gonna put some ETH down on this, because it was, it was still like 18 ETH at the time, which was kind of pricey. And so I was like, I should probably tell her. So I told her real quick, and she was like, as long as you're playing with house money, as long as you're playing with kind of the stuff that you've already, as long as you're not putting new stuff into crypto, like go for it. And so, yeah, like from the moment that I saw it to, I think it was like 24 hours before I acquired it, right? Like it was, let me just do a little bit of thinking. Let me check a couple of boxes, and then I'll grab it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, always got to check with the wifey. And also it's funny. I guess you're just talking about the early days of Nifty Gateway, and similar with you, Jeremy. Into the Ether. This one was my very first NFT, and I did scoop them on secondary. I had the Pikachu one as well, and into the sort of bull run. But that was just a crazy point in time, because felt like anything that you bought off Nifty Gateway back then would just basically 2 or 3x on secondaries straight after. And so you would always be waiting at these abnormal hours, for me anyway, being in Asia, because you'd only have like 5 minutes sort of windows to mint, an open edition or something like that. And I think, everyone's always trying to get for the first edition, and so trying to trade that away. And the vibe was very, very different. And then leading up to Beeple's auction, NFTs got a whole bunch of attention. And I think you're right. I think punks were sort of starting to brew and cook and start getting on the move there. Were you in the Discord at all when you were doing any of your research, or was it just mostly outside of?
It was mostly outside. I wasn't I didn't know what Discord was probably in early 2021, so I definitely wasn't in there early. Yeah, I'd have to look back and try to find when my first post within the Punks Discord was. I haven't done that lately, but yeah, I didn't connect with a bunch of punks inside the Discord. I didn't connect with a bunch of punks one-on-one. I didn't know any punks in real life. I actually didn't meet a bunch of punks until 2023. I met a couple. I met a guy here in Seattle. I went to the CryptoPunk event at the Beeple Studios back in September. Wow. So that was probably the first time I'd been around multiple punks at the same time. There was a brunch there. There was a dinner there before the event. So that was kind of the first social punk thing I've ever done. So that was interesting, because my life leading up to 2022 was mostly Microsoft. I love doing stuff in Web3, but most of my time and professional stuff was all kind of regular job stuff. So it wasn't until 2022, more so 2023, where I had left kind of the Microsoft bubble and where I was starting to spend more time in kind of Web3 culture and trying to meet people.
What did you find sort of fascinating about Web3 culture to go a little bit deeper, do you think?
I think it's the decentralized nature of it and the ownership nature of it. I've always fancied myself kind of a creator and an artist on the side. And so I've always liked goofing around and making things and, building little, basic, I've had kind of domains and little silly basic websites on the side in the past and whatnot, little digital ventures here and there. But I've always been limited by needing to partner with somebody that could code something or needing to kind of rely on some tech or something that I didn't know how to build from scratch. And so, when I started seeing the stories of, creators and folks building collections and building things and building communities, I think that drew me in further. And back in 2021, I did do a little bit of kind of creation and community building and whatnot on my own as well. Throughout my process with kind of researching and finding Punk7741, I ended up developing Expansion Punks, which is a 10K expansion of the original CryptoPunks.
Was that yours? You did the Expansion Punks?
I did. So it was me. So the story of Expansion Punks stems out of all the research that I was doing, trait hunting and understanding all the punks. I have 3 daughters, and they would see me poring over these things for weeks, for months, right? And they would come to me and they would say, like, they'd see me mostly on like CryptoPunks.app homepage, zooming in, looking at the 10K, and they would come over and say, "Hey, let me play with it. Let me find myself." And like the challenge they had was they couldn't really find the features that they wanted in a female punk. The original CryptoPunks, it's more like a 60-40 split between male and female. So they're mostly male. All the coolest kind of rare apes, aliens, and zombies are also male archetype. They don't really have any of the female smaller archetype or the female traits. And then the females that are there have potentially different traits, right? Some of them are democratized, like 3D glasses and stuff like that. But hoodies, for example, smiles, cowboy hats, those are male only traits. And those are traits that each of my daughters kind of would have loved to see in a female. And so goofing around, like it started with me just saying, "Don't worry, like I'll make you custom punks, in Photoshop so that you guys can have your own little stickers and whatnot." And I started there, and that just like snowballed into, whoa, like if I can redesign all these traits and democratize them for females, like that's kind of cool, because then females can find themselves in the space and can kind of see themselves in the punk ecosystem in their ideal kind of archetype. And so it started with like, well, I don't know how to do Solidity, I don't know how to do any of this stuff, so I found a partner to kind of do all of the technical stuff and the smart contract and the website and the coding, and then we launched it as kind of a community driven, DAO driven. We built a DAO around it and gave 34% of all proceeds, and we established a DAO behind it. And so, yeah, it turned into kind of a really interesting experiment of building something, giving it to a DAO, giving all the secondaries to the DAO. There's a multi-sig wallet there now. There's at one point the DAO had like $1 million in value in the treasury. The DAO now voted, I think early last year, to buy a CryptoPunk. So CryptoPunk 2321 is owned by the Expansion Punks community. And so it was a pretty cool story of like, creating something, the art side of it. Like we did all this cool technical stuff to create 10,000 new combinations of traits. We did perceptual hashing algorithms on it to make sure that no Expansion Punk had a pixel for pixel match to any existing CryptoPunk. So it's not just about making sure the traits are different, because in punks, there's all kinds of hidden traits. And you could theoretically have a trait distinct punk, but have a pixel twin still if you've got a hidden trait in the mix. So we did all this stuff to kind of ensure there was a guaranteed uniqueness, proven through algorithms, and then kind of launched it in a way that said like, hey, if there were 10 more, like, we matched rarity, we matched all kinds of stuff to say like, hey, if Larva Labs engine turned back on and created 10K more and sprinkled in a little bit of like democratization across some of these traits to be available on females, what would that look like? What would that collection look like? And that's what I think we were successful with achieving in terms of the Expansion Punks collection.
Jeremy, I actually, looking back, I actually minted, I think, like 20 of these things. And
really?
And for somebody dropped it to me. I can't remember. It was actually another punk. I forgot his name, but he said that I'm sort of doing this because I think at that time, derivative punks started making a bit of a run.
Yeah, for sure.
I had, I just sort of bought some of the fast food punks, punks with like McDonald's hats and stuff like that for a little bit of fun. And then I just listed it for a, absurd sort of high number. I think it was like maybe 1.5 ETH, and they started getting bought. And that's when I started paying attention to derivative punks. And I think Funks came on the scene, Zunks came on the scene at the time, and obviously, expansion punks, and sort of minted them. But I felt like it didn't move, right? It just sort of sat there for a while. And then all of a sudden it picked up a bit of speed towards the end. And then they started moving off the floor. So I do remember that one. It's the punk with the yellow sort of background. I've got them open, amber background, and I've got them open. I just had a look at the cowboy hat with a female. They actually go really, really well. It's a nice combination, which I haven't sort of seen before. So that's super cool. And then, so expansion punks. So is there still an active community there, or what's going on there?
Yeah, there is a community there. There's a Discord, and there's 3,000 roughly unique holders, and there's still sizable value in the treasury. ETH is down compared to where it was at its peak, and there's also the treasury has been spent on different things. They bought, like I said, the treasury bought a Punk last year. There was a DAO had kind of hired a CMO at one point to kind of manage the community. So some money was spent on compensation for different roles at points in 2022 and 2023. Right now, it's kind of, I'd say it's in hibernation mode. The challenge with it is it's still, it is a DAO. So no one can extract any money out of it or any value out of it without kind of going through proposals and without kind of securing the will of the community. So it was one of those kind of experiments that, honestly, if I did it all over again, I don't know if I would have done it the same way, right? Like I think it was super interesting, and it creates a super kind of interesting environment where now there's this thing that exists, and there is a multi-sig wallet with 8 kind of doxed members of the community that need to all coordinate and sign transactions if there's the will of the community there to do something. And there's snapshot, and there's different processes that were set up for it. But with the bear market over the last kind of year and a half, things went pretty quiet, right? Like the value was going down. So it's an interesting one of kind of what happens to that DAO and what happens to that community as people come back to NFTs or as NFTs get more eyes on it.
Yeah, super cool, man. I want to switch gears a little bit and maybe talk about ittybits. And I'll maybe just start with this. I did remember seeing this from Cosmo Medici, who's got the zombie punk. He basically sort of said, ittybits become the mutants to punks. Obviously, disclaimer, he holds a bag. Can you describe what he sort of means by that? And I guess maybe, we can sort of start linking to the story around how you really kicked off ittybits.
Yeah. I mean, I've never spoken to Cosmo, so I don't, I don't know. I have an inkling for how he found out about ittybits. I know one of the community members had, I guess, one of the ittybits that corresponded to one of Cosmo's punks, not the zombie punk. Funny story is, I actually picked up the zombie punk on secondary like a couple of days after mint because somebody floored it, and I acquired it real quick because I thought it was ridiculous to be on the floor. But a guy I know in the community had one of Cosmo's other punks as an ittybit, and I think he reached out to Cosmo on back channel and just said, "I want to gift it to you." So I suspect that's where he first saw it. I can't confirm that though, but it seems like that's where maybe it came out. And I didn't realize until like the day of that Cosmo tweet that he had been acquiring others kind of on the back channels or whatnot. So when that tweet came out, it was a complete surprise. Like, we had minted out rather quickly, by the way. Like, I'll talk about that in here in a second, but we minted out in a rush, and then price kind of, we minted out super cheap, right? Like these things minted at 0.00, I think it was 0.006 or 0.007 ETH and 0.009 for public. And so it was, $10, $15 or something. And so they minted out really quick. And then the prices kind of stayed around there. They went up a little bit, and then they actually dipped back below mid price at one point. And then that Cosmo tweet came out with the mutant stuff, and it quickly kind of, I think more people started realizing, oh, okay, first of all, what are ethscriptions? Because that was the first part of the tweet. Ethscriptions become a thing, and then the ittybits become the mutants of punks. And I think kind of the emphasis there, I think, is more on ethscriptions than it is on ittybits, to be frank. Like, I think, there's a recognition that the ethscriptions protocol, which we should probably talk a little bit about, has been in development and is not going away. And it's been here for now, I don't know, 9-10 months or so. And then ittybits, I would say, is kind of the first project on ethscriptions, in my opinion, that was able to kind of garner attention from like ethscriptions native core, fanboys, if you will, like the folks that have been with ethscriptions since it launched, have been minting ethscriptions since those projects launched. I think ittybits is, in my opinion, probably the first one to like prick ears and have non-ethscriptions folks pay attention to it.
Gotcha. Well, maybe if you can just start for everybody, just a high level summary of, what ittybits is, because I can see them on screen now, but maybe if you could just describe that, and then love to sort of understand ethscriptions a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So ittybits started with, I follow a lot of just, folks on Twitter that are pixel artists that do interesting stuff. And it started in March, late March of 2023, when an artist I follow named J. Peter posted an image of just like an exploratory study he was doing at the time of, I think it was a frame with like 30 punks on it. And the punks were all 8x8 pixels instead of 24x24. So he had just reduced, some of the most well-recognized punks into little 8x8 punks. And the funny thing was like, even though they were only 64 pixels each, you could still make out which punk was which based on just your knowledge of traits and like familiarity with those iconic kind of punks. And that fascinated me. I was like, oh, I wonder what my 7741 would look like. So one evening I just fired up Photoshop and I was like, okay, let me just use the principles that he used to make those 20, 30, proofs of concept. And let me try to apply that to my punk. And I did. And that was kind of cool. But it was limiting in that, like, you couldn't really do all the traits. I couldn't imagine a whole 10K with just 64 pixels because it just wasn't enough real estate. And so then I tried again with 10x10 with 100 pixels. And it still wasn't quite enough real estate to actually differentiate all 10,000 punks. And then I tried again at 12x12. And like, as soon as I built like the first archetype and like put a couple of traits on it, and I realized like, okay, 144 pixels, 12x12, 25% of the original 576 pixels is actually enough real estate to build a 10K, differentiate all 10K, recognize all 10K. And I was like, okay, like at that point, it was just more of experimentation. I was like, let me try. Let me like go trait by trait. Let me build out each trait, by hand in pixels. And then I already had, just by previous work doing expansion punks, I already had a bunch of like scripts that I had written in the past, cobbled together in Excel. Like, this was before ChatGPT, so I didn't know how to write Python. Like, I was literally writing like Excel functions that would combine traits that I would then feed into Image Magic and generate the punk collection. And so as part of my exercise of building expansion punks, I had built out the original 10K CryptoPunks first to make sure that I could, what I wanted to do, and this was like one of the funnest things that I did with expansion punks, was I built all of the individual traits. This was before the traits were like published as SVGs and then the new contract in August of 2021. So I had to like hand build all of the original CryptoPunks traits, hand match all of the PNG, like the hex colors back to Punk's PNG. And so I had this folder of all the traits, and I generated an Image Magic script that would build the entire 10K and then rebuild the 10K punks.png using all of my layers, and then pixel matched every one of mine to every one of the originals to verify that my layers were authentic enough to build the entire collection without a single pixel error. And so that was like the first process to like, if I could do that, then I could have confidence in stacking order, in all the hex values, in all the trait pixels and everything, to then recompose those in different ways. And so like I already had all the scripts. So all I had to do with ittybits, once I had redesigned all of the traits in 12x12, I could literally just feed them back into the same scripts that I already did for the original CryptoPunks collection, and generate the entire collection again using 12x12 instead of 24x24. So that was that was I mean, literally by the time I designed it, I mean, the design took a while to like minimize traits and test and like find pixel collisions and optimize traits and all that kind of stuff. By the time I actually had the traits to generate the collection, it was like literally 10 minutes. It was very fast.
How did you figure all this stuff out? Like, because you said you're not sort of a technical kind of guy. Like, was
Yeah.
this just like...
So the early days, like the entire expansion punks collection pre ChatGPT, I did with Excel, and I built Excel if-then functions and combination functions and all that kind of stuff that would build out little one-line image magic scripts. And image magic is like an open source imaging software that basically you can tell it to compile layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer, right? And so I would write, and I have this, literally it's like 100, 200 columns of data in an Excel file multiplied by 10,000 rows. All of this, like if this, then that logic that built out all of the expansion punks row by row. And that would all kind of concatenate and build into a final single one line per expansion punk. And then you would just feed that into Windows command line, which would then call on image magic to do all the compositioning and build out the collection. And so, yeah, it was super manual. It took me months and months to figure all that out. Cause again, like, even just learning how to use Windows command line was a challenge for me at the time. But then came ChatGPT, and I realized you could ask it how to do this stuff, and it taught me how to build Python, like to write Python. I wouldn't say I write any of it. It taught me how to prompt Python. It taught me how to build local web host servers so that I could, mimic a website on my desktop. It taught me how to, initialize and deploy through Git. It taught me how to push through Git onto Netlify to host actual pages. And so, I'd say 95% of the experience that you see right now on ittybits.xyz was all stuff that I built as a non-developer using ChatGPT, using open source Gits, and brute force prompting and modifying and prompting and testing and modifying until I got to a point where the site was functional. It wasn't until mid-December, like a couple of weeks before ittybits launched, that I actually brought on a friend of mine who's a developer to kind of take a look at it and optimize it and clean it up. Like the funny story is like ChatGPT will get you really, really far, but it's not always the most optimized version of code. So like the way you see the site operating today, every time you clicked on something, all 10,000 ittybits would load in the background again. Every time you like navigated to a different page, all 10,000 ittybits had to load. And so it was super snappy on my desktop, but as soon as it went live on Netlify and out in the public, like it would slow down. And so I did have some help kind of optimizing calls and making the header more efficient so that, it wouldn't reload everything every single time you did something. But it's still a really cool use case of using AI to kind of unlock potential and figure things out. And really, like, for me, the year was all about, 2023 was all about, can I do this without a dev? Can I get this to mint? Can I get a collection? Can I do it in a way that I don't have to depend on somebody else? Can I envision the experience that I want as a collector on a web page? The features, the explorability. There's some really, if you're on a desktop, you really have to check out ittybits.xyz, because there's like the zoom feature, which was definitely inspired by the functionality on CryptoPunks.app. But the explore feature is something that, frankly, you haven't seen before in NFTs. And it's a desktop only experience, but it's a data dream to be able to go in and pivot all of the ittybits. By the way, it's the same metadata as punks, so it's applicable if you're a punk owner as well. You can go there and you can pivot the data, you can filter the data, you can create 3D scatter plots, you can create tree map versions of data. If you're a statistician and you love looking at data through different visualizations, you'll have a lot of fun kind of just pivoting all the data.
Yeah, I'm on it now. It's actually really cool. And if you've got a chance, everyone should check out ittybits.xyz on the explore section. But it almost looks like a 3D sort of, what kind of graph would you sort of say that is? But then you'll be able to pick out, like, so for example, I'm just highlighting a single sort of block at the back there is basically seed phrase, right? So is the male with sort of attributes sort of trunks, and he sort of sticks out. So it's interesting to sort of see punks stacked up this way, because you can compare the different types of punks, aliens and apes, females and males, and you can just sort of compare them pretty quickly visually. It's pretty interesting.
It's cool because like each punk is represented as a cube. It's a grain of sand, and the grain of sand is colored to match the skin tone of the respective punk and or ittybit. And you can hover over any of those grains of sand, and the tooltip will pop up and show you which ittybit you're looking at. It'll show you all the traits. You can then click on that ittybit and go to that ittybit specific dedicated page to look at all the traits in more detail. And then of course that's also where it exposes a lot of the new metadata that I've associated to ittybits, which are not part of the CryptoPunks collection. There's a lot of, because ittybits are new, because it's a derivative, it's unabashedly a derivative. I don't hide from that. Like it's literally, it is the derivative of the punks in a smaller, kind of more efficient canvas, using what I think is a very interesting, more efficient use of the Ethereum blockchain. Like these are still on Ethereum, but they're not NFTs. I know you started the conversation today with the ittybits NFT collection. These are actually not NFTs. They're ethscriptions, which you say, well, why is that? Like, what's the difference? And I think it's really important for people to understand this new tech. There are no tokens here. There's no smart contract associated with ittybits. Each ittybit exists as a fully on-chain representation of the code that makes up the image that has been added to a call data transaction on Ethereum. So what does that mean? Like, let me start with like, what is an ethscription and how did this protocol come about? So ethscriptions came about as a concept earlier in 2023 when Middlemarch, also known by dumb name numbers, also known as Tom Lehman, was trying to like prove that Bitcoin inscriptions were dumb. Like his first thesis was, inscribing stuff on Bitcoin is dumb. I'm going to prove it by like trying to show you how that would work on Ethereum and show you how stupid it is. And like, that's the story. Like he started there, but then the more he like researched it and the more he tried to like prove it was dumb, he found interesting, novel things to do with it. And he found that like you could actually instead of putting it on a Satoshi, like you do with Bitcoin, ethscriptions, what you're doing is you're taking the data URI, like the code equivalent for what an image is, and you're putting that in the memo field. It's called call data. You're putting that in the call data field of a transaction, of an ETH transaction. And so the easiest way to explain it to somebody is it's the memo field of a Venmo transaction. You go out for drinks with a friend. They paid for it. You owe them $10. You Venmo them $10. And in the memo, you put a little beer emoji. That beer emoji, is artwork that's going into a memo. And that memo goes along with that transaction history in the call data, and it can be called from the call data in the future. And that call data field is big enough to put artwork as long as the artwork is smaller than roughly 96 kbytes. So little pixel art fits fine. SVG, you could do some higher res stuff with SVGs. That will look fine. You can't put, a 5 gigabyte, or a 5 megabyte image on there right now because the call data field just doesn't have enough space for it. But little pixel art like punks or like ittybits works just fine. And so that concept of like, oh, anybody can do this. Like any artist can go into MetaMask, go into advanced settings, say display call data, because by default it's hidden because it's more of a back-end administrative field to speak with smart contracts. But you can go into MetaMask, tell it to allow you to see the call data field, and then take little pixel art, convert it into its data URI. There's online tools that do this. Take that data URI, convert it into base 64. There's online tools that do that. Take the base 64, convert it into hex. There's online tools that do that. And then add that jumbled hex data to the call data field of a 0 ETH transaction. Send yourself 0 ETH, because you can send yourself 0 ETH all day long. You just pay the gas. Send yourself 0 ETH, embed that call data, and boom, your image is now fully on the network as call data information. And then the protocol around ethscriptions defines how to look for that call data, right? It defines like the syntax to look for. It's a data URI format. And so these indexers out there are just watching every transaction on Ethereum. And if the syntax and call data matches the ethscription syntax, it sets it aside and says, hey, this is an ethscription. It might be an image, it might be an audio file, it might be a PDF, whatever it is. If it's a valid data URI, it recognizes it, it indexes it, and it will display it in a browser and display it in marketplaces that deal with ethscriptions. And so it's just this really, like it's still Ethereum, which blows my mind, but you're not having to engage in smart contracts. So engaging like trading or sending someone an NFT through a 721 smart contract could cost you $20 easily just to transfer an NFT. I transferred my ittybit to my wife when I bought her one on secondary, transferred it to her Julia.eth account for 77 cents. And that's because you're not dealing with smart contracts. You're not changing state. All you're doing is changing ownership of the transaction ID by sending that transaction ID to somebody else.
So Jeremy, let me ask you this: like, I mean, what are the pros and cons between, I guess, an ethscription and a typical sort of NFT? So, like, what would be a reason to use ethscriptions over smart contracts and sort of vice versa? I mean, as an example, could you still find a way to token gate things with an ethscription?
Yeah, and actually, we're doing that already. So, so you can, for example, on ittybits.xyz, we ethscription gate your access to other features on the site. So if you own an ittybit and you connect your wallet, you can see the ittybits that you own on our site. And if you navigate to any one of those ittybits that you own, you get high-res imagery, poster imagery, like super high-res versions of, everybody knows like the Avant Art posters that were printed back in September for punks. We've got those coming for ittybits. We're actually launching them tomorrow. And we've partnered with ox.shop. And there's going to be an authentication experience where it looks for the ownership record of the ethscription. And if you own that ittybit, you'll be allowed to print a high-res version of that poster, for example. And so you can do these, quote, token gating experiences, but it just uses a different approach, right? It's not using a smart contract verification or token lookup. It's using an ethscription API, looking at the indexers and seeing if you're still the valid owner of that latest ethscription.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. But there's also, I mean, I really like it because like the benefits of it is, for someone that I don't write a lick of Solidity. Like I wouldn't know where to start. I would probably start with ChatGPT, but like for me, that's like, I don't really know if I want to write a smart contract and be responsible for if it goes wrong and all that kind of stuff, knowing that it's like, if a website goes wrong, you can like update the website. But if a smart contract goes wrong and it drains people's wallets, like that's a problem, right? So like what's great about ethscriptions is it really allows someone like me to kind of actually etscribe stuff, put stuff on chain, and build a collection around that without ever having to touch like Solidity or a smart contract. I like it for that. Now, does it fall short? Absolutely. There's a ton of things, the ecosystem around ethscriptions is still nascent, right? You've got no primary major wallets like MetaMask are showing ethscriptions. OpenSea doesn't show ethscriptions. So there's still a lot of growth. There are marketplaces like ordax.io is probably the most recognized right now that are dedicated to the ethscription space. So you can go and see your assets by connecting your wallet there and seeing what you own and try trading and buying and whatnot. But it's still nascent. There's still a lot of growth to happen here. But like and like you said, like all of the token gating experiences and all the apps out there that are built for ERC 721, they don't work yet for ethscriptions. So it's really about like, will ethscriptions take off? Is there enough of a value proposition on the gas savings and on the other experiences? And I'm bullish on it. Like personally, I think there is, because every time you trade, every time you buy a shitcoin on Sushi Swap or on any of the major swap platforms, I don't do that very much, but you're still paying like exorbitant transaction fees just to like speculate and buy shitcoins. That you can do all of that now using Ethscription's tech. There's a parallel called Facet Swap that has used the open source Uniswap code to build a version of it on Facet. And you can do all of that for pennies on the dollar. So for every transaction that may have cost you, 15, 20, $30, it costs you less than $1 to do the same transaction on Facet using Facet Swap, using Ethscription's technology. So the team behind Ethscriptions and the team behind Facet Protocol, like they're building, there's a lot of new stuff coming soon. So I'm excited about it. I'm bullish about like the potential this has for everyday collectors to be able to get what I think is a taste of what 2021, 2020 NFT trading felt like, because you can do it for pennies on the dollar. Like you can't really do that anywhere on Ethereum L1 now, except for Ethscriptions, which technically is still L1. Like there is no L2. This is the mind-blowing part. Like it's still using all of the L1 security and decentralization because you're still operating out of call data on L1. You're not moving to L2 at all.
Gotcha. Man, this is super fascinating. There's just everywhere you look, there is little rabbit holes you can go down. And I'm just looking at the Audex marketplace now. I mean, there's already Ethereum Punks and Ethereum Funks as well. So there's all these other derivatives that are already on here. But even like in the ordinal sort of space, it's starting to pop as well. Like to be honest with you, I haven't had enough time to go deep into them, and I just sort of been fading a lot of these things. But you might be onto something here, man. It's first off, the ittybits are really, really cute. I want to try and find my ones. I picked one up last night for the PunkCast wallet, but I'll probably try and experiment with this a little bit more. Well, congratulations on the the launch, man, and I think would be sort of super excited to sort of see where this goes next. But I mean, what is next for ittybits, do you think?
It's been a lot of fun to kind of build out to the launch, which happened back on January 5th. And then we're only a month in, right? We're only a month in. We're closing in on, I think it's 2 million in secondary volume at this point, which is pretty crazy. Like in the 1 month of this project's lifetime, we're already the second highest trading Ethscription project. And we're close second. Like, if trends continue, we'll be number one soonish. And that's pretty remarkable for like a protocol, and there's dozens and probably 100+ collections out there on Ethscriptions, and this project, pretty much overtook them all in like a couple of weeks. And like you said, there are a lot of other punk projects. Like the first 10K that was even minted on Ethscriptions was the original byte perfect 10K Ethereum punks. And I think that's kind of par for the course. Anytime there's a new protocol, someone takes the punks and like mints them there. So what's next? We're looking for ways to continue to kind of differentiate and bring eyes to Ethscriptions, because like the way I like to talk about ittybits is more efficient punks on a more efficient Ethereum. And that's a bold statement, right? Like it starts with, my journey into Ethscriptions, almost a year ago, was this like eye-opening experience of, all right, like you can do all this stuff on Ethereum, still on Ethereum, but you can do it in ways that are a little bit more efficient, a little bit more wallet friendly. That's interesting. In parallel, unbeknownst to me at the time, I was goofing around and like building out ittybits, not knowing how I would bring ittybits to market. And it kind of all came together in December when I was realizing like, well, my journey in researching and understanding Ethscriptions and my journey in building these has been this parallel converging journey of more efficient punks on a more efficient Ethereum. And my thesis and my aspiration for ittybits is just to be seen as that like welcoming collection and platform to people as they come over from Ethereum to Ethscriptions. Like I don't in any capacity think that ittybits replaces or diminishes CryptoPunks. Like I freaking love punks, and a lot of what I love about Web3 kind of derives from kind of punk culture and like punks themselves. It's for me like the whole ittybits concept is this concept of like being kind of like, just like punks weren't the first things on NFT, on Ethereum, ittybits aren't the first things on ethscriptions. But to me, like, the legacy that I want ittybits to leave behind is the legacy of one that brought the attention, brought people to ethscriptions to kind of explore them further, and to kind of exist as like that blue chip kind of representation of more efficient punks on a more efficient Ethereum. Now, that's not to say like we're done, like we're done and we're walking away and like it's just going to exist. Like there's stuff that we still want to do. Like we're working, like I said, with ox.shop to bring merchandise and all kinds of other scenarios to ittybits holders. And so there's a lot of kind of cool, just exploratory stuff that I want to do there. And I also feel like, ittybits, it's really me and, a couple of devs that I work with on the side now. It's kind of like we're pretty agile, right? There's not a lot of like machinery that needs to be moved around to kind of explore new things. And so I feel like there's some agility there that affords us flexibility to try new things quickly and to experiment and really like a lot of the things, anything you can think of that like punks can or should do, like we could probably do it too, right? Like, and so it's a nice kind of place to be in terms of just exploring opportunities in Web3 through this like smaller canvas of 12 by 12.
Awesome, Jeremy. Like one thing I will say though is that I guess the collection that I'm sort of seeing with ittybits, it's a completely sort of reimagined take on a punk derivative, right? So I mean, I love them. They're really, really cute. I mean, I've seen whites before, but like aesthetically, they don't really, sit well with. I mean, I wouldn't want to carry it as a profile picture or collect them, but these things are really cute. They're almost like baby punks in some ways, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of actually really cool things that we did with it too that take it beyond just punks. Like one of the things that is unique about these, and this is going to get kind of dorky, but I think like, folks that appreciate the punks will appreciate this as well. Punks are actually transparent, right? Like they're on transparent backgrounds. There are no pixel values in the surrounding around the punks archetype. Ittybits are not. So every single pixel inside of an ittybit has data in it, but there are 99, the background pixels though are 99% transparent. Why and what does that mean? Like this was a really kind of innovative part of this project was I had to find a way to launch the site, show people the artwork, give people access to the Explorer and to the entire experience of ittybits.xyz before I minted the project, before I launched the project. And the risk of doing that, as anyone probably knows, is front running. Like as soon as you start showing the art, people are going to like right click, save it. They're going to write scripts to download all the assets and they're going to try to mint it out first. And they did that even with this project, which I knew they would do. Somebody pulled it all and put it on ordinals. Somebody pulled it all and tried to like one by one started putting them on OpenSea. But I knew they would do that. And so what I did with that is I put up decoy assets. All of the assets that were on ittybits.xyz at launch were not authentic ittybits. And what I mean by that is they didn't have hash matched SHA values. And so this is going to get dorky, but this is stuff that like I had a lot of fun developing for this project. Every ittybit, the background looks transparent, but the background actually has random hex values thrown into it set at 99.5% transparent. And why did I do that? Because every ittybit was actually mined. Every ittybit has, if you feed the authentic ETH-scribed ittybit image into a SHA-256 file hashing algorithm, the last 4 digits of the ittybit will match the CryptoPunk from which it came. And so that's pretty phenomenal because what happens with SHA matching is you don't know what the SHA-256 value of an image is until you test it, until you upload it through the algorithm. It's a deterministic approach, but the output is a 64 character hexadecimal mess, right? Like it's random characters. And if you change 1 byte of information, 1 0 to a 1 in that file, it's called an avalanche effect. The entire string of 64 characters becomes completely different. And so the only way to kind of predetermine the last 4 digits to match the punk is to just test it over and over and over again by changing something in the image, either changing a 0 to a 1, changing metadata, or in my case, changing the random background hex pixels. And so using ChatGPT, I wrote all these scripts that randomly insert different hex values into the background at 99.5% transparent. and just mine it over and over again. They just keep mining it, testing it, throwing it away, testing it, throwing it away until it finds a hash match to the punk from which it came. And so on average, that's 65,000 tests per ittybit. In bulk, I had to create 648 million ittybits to make this collection. And that's because sometimes you'd get lucky and it would find it in a few hundred or a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of iterations. But sometimes you had to make 506,000 ittybits before it finally found the last 4 digits to match the hex or to match the CryptoPunk value. So like literally it was this like mining process of just, laborious script work to generate enough ittybits where each one would hash match back to its CryptoPunk from which it came, which I think is like super special. It's super nerdy. Not everybody looks at these, understands that, but if you dive into the website and you dive into the each ittybits page, you can toggle these background hash pixels. You can tell the computer like take all the pixels, make them fully opaque so I can see what those colors are, and you can see every ittybit actually has a unique fingerprint of background hash pixels that allow it to then hash match back to the punk.
That's super cool. Nerding out, loving sort of the nerding out with you, and I think I could sort of hear the passion in your voice as you're sort of talking about ittybits. And one thing I'll probably sort of say as well, and maybe we'll sort of leave it there for the ittybits, is that you definitely come with a very purist artistic sort of approach to the collection, right? And it's there for appreciation. The launch was sort of really low priced and cheap, and it's really around the appreciation for the technology and also paying homage to punks as well, right? And so I think, I think I'm going to sweep some floors after this call, but yeah, sort of thanks for sharing, I guess, that with ittybits, man, and I'd love to sort of see where this goes next. So Jeremy, what's your favorite NFT?
Yeah, this is a crazy one. Like I've been thinking a lot about this, and my favorite NFT is not actually a token. It is an ethscription. And it's one of the first things I ethscribed early in my kind of journey of understanding how the protocol works. And where I'll start with that is what's very unique about the ethscription protocol is this thing called first come, first scribe. And what that means is if you ethscribe something in its byte perfect format, so the bytes are exactly as they're structured. If somebody tries to ethscribe the same thing after you, the protocol won't recognize it as a valid ethscription. And so why is that important? Like that's important because what you can do is you can then preserve artifacts on ethscriptions in their byte perfect format and own them. And that was like the moment that I realized that like that's how you could use this protocol as like an archaeological log of authentic, original byte perfect images or documents or whatever. I got to searching, right? I like put on my Indiana Jones hat and it was like, okay, like what kind of vintage assets can I find that are less than 96 bytes that'll fit in call data, and I can ethscribe them and be the sole owner of them. And so that journey took me to the original Bitcoin distribution, and I found all of the original Satoshi authenticated Bitcoin zip files for the software. And I extracted all of I verified them with the MDA hashes to make sure that they were the same hash files that he had sent out. I unzipped all the files and I found all of the original Bitcoin artwork of the little pixel Bitcoin Fave icon imagery. And I ascribed each of the byte perfect Satoshi authenticated his artwork. He designed them. He admits it in Bitcoin talk forums that he designed those pixel art. And I described.
What does it look like, Jeremy?
The first one is a tiny little, like 16 by 16 pixel circular gold coin that says BC on it. It's before the glyph with the lines through it. It just says BC. I'll send you a link to the description after this. And it's like it's literally authenticated as his artwork, byte perfect. Anyone that comes along 100 years from now and unzips the original Bitcoin distribution and finds the imagery and tries to ethscribe that artwork will be declined because it's already been ethscribed. The protocol only recognizes the first instance of that byte perfect image. And that's pretty freaking cool. Like, like that started this journey of like finding authentic byte perfect original pieces, and inscribing them and putting them on. I did the same thing with like, I was able to go back on archive.org and find the PhD internal Stanford profile page for the founders of Google. And they had a version of the Google logo that probably nobody's really ever seen, that was hosted on their like, early 90s or mid 90s, I guess, late 90s Stanford PhD profile page. And I inscribed those things because like, these are like digital assets that the provenance is there. You can go and look at archive.org and find these old web pages with these byte perfect images that were as created, as uploaded by the creators at the time. And you can put them on chain and you can own them and you can trade them and you can prove that they're original. Like this idea of like using a protocol as like an archaeological provenance journal is just fascinating to me. And so that's a pretty fun and cool use case for why ethscriptions are a little different than anything else.
That's so cool and super nerdy. Another sort of side question for you. Where did like all these ethscription collectors hang out?
Yeah, so they hang out in the ethscriptions Discord. They hang out on Twitter a lot. You've got a few of them now in the ittybits Discord. So yeah, I would say it's mostly Discord, and the community is growing. Like, I'd say a lot more eyes in the last. I mean, it doesn't hurt that someone like Cosmo kind of tweets out something like ethscriptions is a thing, or will become a thing, and so definitely more people are paying attention, and the community is growing. But yeah, it's still fascinating because still most people don't really understand it yet, or don't know how to differentiate it from like an L2.
Just on the side of that too. So with an ethscription, I mean, would you ever? I think you sort of said they're limited by space and size, right? Is there a world where we might be able to get like some high res artwork or gen art on an ethscription at some stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One is through SVGs. So you can put some really, a great example is a friend of mine just launched Apescriptions, which is probably what you think it is. It's like the general artwork of Bored Apes, but it's been refactored and new traits have been added and all that kind of stuff. But it's all in super high res because it's all using SVGs. And that was launched a week or so ago. You can do generative art. You can point to JavaScript code. You can point to HTML. You can point to other things. And so there already have been some basic generative art projects launched on ethscriptions. And then there's also this concept of recursive ethscriptions, where you can inscribe something, and then the next ethscription you can call information through APIs and whatnot of another ethscription. So you can basically imagine, there's a world where you can ethscribe each of the traits of a collection, and then as separate ethscriptions. And then in a new ethscription, you would then compose your NFT, for example, using all those different traits as layers. And so you could actually start to combine other higher res assets into singular etscriptions. So there's ways of doing that. And there's people working on other protocols that will make that, I think, more friendly and easier to drive through. And like I said, like the space is still relatively early, and there's still builders left and right figuring out new ways to kind of leverage the protocol.
So how much you trying to understand recursion? Because I've heard that word a couple of times. So you're basically sort of saying on a etscription, you're going to have individual traits as layers that roll up to the actual end sort of product. And would you own all of those traits as well, like those separate etscriptions?
You could, but I think in this case, like what you would probably do is, as a builder, as a collection builder, you would probably, let's say there's 100 traits in your collection, you would inscribe each of the 100 traits individually. And then you would inscribe aggregation etscriptions that then reference each of those traits that build it. So they build it in the visual, and then you would mint or sell those aggregation etscriptions and retain the source traits. That's how, in my mind, it would probably work. But yeah, I've experimented with that using HTML and I even like etscribed like a really high res, like 2000 by 2000 pixel image, because you can do HTML etscriptions, which means you can, inside the HTML, you can just point to IPFS, which is kind of goofy, right? Because the whole point of ethscriptions is to put the information on chain. But in theory, you can escribe something that then has a pointer that points to an IPFS file that's much higher res. So you can theoretically get the benefit of high res visuals by just cheating and using IPFS as well.
Gotcha. Super interesting. Just switching gears back to punks. There's a sort of a few questions that I normally just generally ask, and I know we sort of nerded out on ittybits, but just switching gears a little bit back onto punks. If money wasn't sort of an issue for you, what would be your dream punk, do you think?
It would. I definitely think it would be a zombie. Like, I love zombies. I like zombies more than apes and aliens. So it'd probably be a zombie. I haven't spent a lot of time like defining which one it would be. I mean, I would love to. Here's like a hidden Easter egg. I designed the zombie that I wanted in expansion punks, and so it was basically my 7741, but just as zombie skin instead of light skin. And I was able to acquire that on secondary market in that collection after launch. So I kind of like have my perfect one. It would be like the version of me if it were ever become a zombie. But yeah, I think to me it would if I had to pick an existing one out of the collection, it would be any zombie with a shadow beard, because I've always loved the shadow beard trait. I love how it's this like subtle. You can still see the skin tone behind it. I've always loved that trait, and so it would probably be any zombie with a shadow beard.
Gotcha. And if you were to look across into the punk community, like, do you have any sort of favorite punk personalities that come to mind?
I saw this kind of in the invite to this meeting. I was like, how am I going to answer that? Because I don't have like single punks that I kind of aspire to kind of follow every tweet and all that kind of stuff. What I love about the punk community is that everybody has an opinion. I don't always agree with them, but but everybody has an opinion, and often it's articulated in a way that I can understand where they're coming from. And so I tend to like just follow punks, right? Like I see a punk PFP, you know, if I know that they're actually the punk owner, because there's a lot of punks that aren't actually the punk owner, like I'll give them a follow. And I love the community as a whole in terms of just kind of seeing, you know, what they address, what they talk about. So I see it more as like this aggregation of ideas versus like hinging on any one punk's kind of timeline, if you will.
Gotcha. It's funny you sort of say that, right? Because you know, punks can be divisive on certain topics, but I think that's also part and parcel of the type of community that we attract, right? We attract builders like yourself, you know, people almost at the top of their game in some respects, right? Artists, technologists, and the like. And so I think all of them come with very independent thinking and points of view. So I think it's a good thing. But I could sort of see where you're sort of coming from when you're sort of describing punks like that. And if you would describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that for you?
Yeah, I thought about this too. I think like I would probably try, if I had one word to describe it in, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use a German word because Germans like to concatenate and build a bunch of meaning into one word. And that's the term zeitgeist, which is, you know, commonly referred to as like spirit of the times. You know, it's the cultural and like political and emotional culture of like the things that are going on at the current time. And I feel that really, like, no matter what happens, like punks are like moving with zeitgeist to me, right? Like they're always like, they're at the front of things, at the front of culture. They're often early in assessing something. They have opinions early, and whatnot. So like, to me, like punk culture in general, it really follows that zeitgeist of what's going on in the current market. And so I think that's an apt kind of way of thinking about, you know, distilling it down into kind of one concept.
Awesome. And how do you feel about V1 punks?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not even a derivative, right? It's kind of like it's a weird. in a weird way, it's a derivative only because of like the wrapping functionality that happened post V2 or post originals. I mean, I don't own any V1s. I don't think I looked for my 7741 as a V1, but I think it's part of the batch that has not been wrapped yet, so it doesn't exist yet. If it were out there and it were cheap, I would probably buy it just for the culture. But I haven't been like, I've never shopped that marketplace. It's not something that I'm like following. I mean, I think there is digital provenance to what it is. So I recognize it. I understand that it's there. I think value follows consensus in this space. And I think the overwhelming consensus is that, CryptoPunks are what are recognized today as CryptoPunks, or in I guess it would be the V2s in some people's minds. So yeah, I mean, but I don't discount them. Like, I think there's something to them. There is a digital provenance to what they represent. And I think that's super interesting in this space. I think that sums it up. Like, I don't own any, and I would like to own 7741 at one point just for the community.
Yeah, no, well said. How do you feel about, I guess, the Yuga acquisition, and I guess in some ways the Punks brand being tied to Yuga?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, I don't know if it's, I don't know how to assess what could have been or what would have been or what should have been in another world, because it happened. And like I don't think what I appreciate is they're taking it, Yuga's not trying to commercialize it and not trying to rush into anything with it. I think whether Punks are owned by Yuga or whether they're like, I think Punks would always be Punks regardless of who owned it or what was being done with it. So I'm somewhat ambivalent to it, right? Like, I don't own any apes. I've never had any Yuga assets. I've never, acquired or sought to acquire any other Yuga assets. And so I don't really have a strong opinion on, should we or should we not be part of the Yuga umbrella. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that, because I think like, the Punks are like the toothpaste is out of the bottle. Like, you can't put it back in. You can't really change the culture around what they've become. I guess you could potentially F it up if you did some really bad moves, which I appreciate have not been made yet. So I think that's where I stand on it right now, is like, I don't spend a lot of time kind of imagining it or thinking about it.
And I guess last question for the Punkcast today. If you could pass on a message to the next era of your punk, 7741, what would you like to say to them?
Yeah, I'd say like build on it. Like, use it for connections, use it to build, use it for like the zeitgeist, like embody the zeitgeist that comes with owning and being part of the community, and, preserve it in that way. Like, don't do anything stupid that like, ruins its aesthetic for the next owner, right? Like, I mean, it's not something I plan on doing anything with or selling or anything anytime soon. So, but eventually if that time were to come, like, I would definitely want the new person to look at it as something to leverage as kind of a token into a community, a token into opportunity, and a token into connections that can hopefully help them, build and grow within the space as well.
Jeremy, this was a super fun conversation, man. Thank you so much for educating me on ethscriptions and help me sort of understand ittybits a lot more, but also fascinating to hear your story. And, in some ways we were connected to the past through expansion pumps without really knowing it. And I hope to sort of catch you at one of these punk events going forward as well. But, I guess any sort of final closing comments on your side, and, what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, I mean, first closing is just awesome time. It's great to meet you. I do look forward to attending more punk events in the future and getting to know more punks more directly. And the easiest way to reach me is, just find me on Twitter. It's @Posvar, or you can probably just search up Jeremy.eth and find me that way as well. And yeah, let's connect. I mean, I love ideating and building. I love, goofing around with little pixel art here and there as well. Find me and connect. Like, let's share interests together and let's find something to build together.
Amazing. Guys, that wraps up an episode of PunkCast for the weekend. We'll be back next week with another amazing punk. Bye for now.